They rolled in at sunrise, the way a foreign army might invade a sleepy town. Clipboards in hand, those blinding neon vests, a big flatbed truck rumbling with power tools like it was carrying weapons. And leading the charge, that HOA president, Chad Prescott, marching out front like some self-appointed general leading a cheap crusade. I was still rubbing sleep out of my eyes when the first grinding saw hit my grandfather's old ranch fence. And the sound, it didn't just pierce wood. It cut right through 70 years of grit, of history, of stubborn old cowboy blood. And the absolute worst part? Grandpa, he was already there, sitting on his porch rocking gently, steam drifting off his mug like nothing in the world was wrong, while the chaos unfolded 10 feet from him. "You boys sure you want to do that?" he called out, calmly. Voice steady, like a man who'd seen worse than a petty HOA land grab. But they ignored him, like they always do to old folks who speak softly and know far, far more than they let on. Chad's slick hair, those shiny loafers, sunglasses even though the sun wasn't quite up yet. He crossed his arms and announced loudly, almost yelling into the quiet morning, "This outdated eyesore is getting removed today. Per Community Regulation Update, Article C9. We're improving property values. Folks." He said it like he was gifting us a miracle, not ripping down the last piece of the old Sutton Ranch that existed long before the HOA. The cul-de-sacs and the manicured lawns were even a twinkle in some developer's eye. I felt my jaw clench because that fence, it wasn't just a wooden barrier, it was history, hand-built by Grandpa and his father before him, back when this land, our land, was pure open ranch country, stretching farther than you could see. Weathered, sure, but strong, carved with initials, old cattle marks, the wear from 100 storms and seasons. It belonged here the way the mountains belong to the earth. The workers revved their equipment again and the old wood trembled, but Grandpa didn't move, didn't shout, didn't panic. He just sipped his tea, waiting for a punchline he already knew. "Sir, please stand back," one worker called out, not even looking up. "We need to proceed." Grandpa leaned back, one eyebrow lifted, like a man watching city boys poke a rattlesnake with a stick. "Last warning," he said, and I felt electricity run through the air, because Grandpa never repeated himself unless the universe was about to clap someone. But Chad Prescott scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic, Harold. It's just an old fence. Rules apply to everyone, even sentimental old-timers." That did it. The neighborhood gasped. People were watching from their windows, walking their dogs slower than usual, pretending not to stare but absolutely filming behind tinted glass. Every week, the HOA finds a new hill to die on. Grass too tall, mailbox not matching, God forbid, a garden gnome not community approved. But this time they picked the wrong hill, the wrong fence, the wrong man. Grandpa finally set his tea down and stood, spine straight despite his age, his old hat tilted low over eyes that had seen more land than most of these folks knew existed. "Boy," he said to Chad, voice steady like a quiet storm brewing, "that fence ain't HOA business." Chad smirked like he'd already won. "Everything inside this community falls under our jurisdiction." "Funny thing," Grandpa replied, stepping off the porch, slow and deliberate. "You don't run this land," Chad snapped. "We own this neighborhood. We set the regulations. You own houses," Grandpa corrected him. "But land," he tapped his boot against the dirt. "Some land don't belong to you." Confusion spread across the workers' faces, but Chad waved again, signaling for the saw to resume. Metal shrieked against wood. Grandpa's lips pressed into a thin line. Not fear, just irritation. The kind you see on a rancher when a city slicker parks a sports car right in front of a cattle gate. "Stop the work," I shouted instinctively, running forward, but Grandpa raised a hand, stopping me dead in my tracks like he just commanded the wind. "Let 'em," he said with a smirk that chilled the back of my neck. And that's when I knew something was coming. Something big. Grandpa only had that tone when somebody was about to learn a painful, expensive lesson. The workers kept cutting, splinters flying. The neighborhood gathered silently. "Crazy old coot thinks he's above the HOA," someone murmured. "Bet they fine him into moving," another whispered. But Grandpa wasn't nervous. He was amused, like he'd placed the perfect bait and the fish were taking the hook with full, arrogant enthusiasm. The first section of the fence cracked and dropped. Chad exhaled triumphantly like he'd just conquered a kingdom. Grandpa barely blinked. "Congratulations," he said dryly. "You boys just crossed a line." "Yes," Chad scoffed. "The property line. That's how this works." "No," Grandpa corrected, his voice serious now. That's not a property line. Suspense tightened the air. Even the birds stopped singing. Grandpa pointed with 2 fingers at the ground where the fence stood. That right there, he said, slowly, each word carving into the morning like a knife, marks federal boundary land. Silence. Stillness. Then a loud, nervous laugh from Chad. Federal land, please? This is a suburban planned community, not Washington, D.C. Son, Grandpa said, completely calm. That fence wasn't put up for cows. It was put up by the government. Half your fancy neighborhood is sitting on land leased from the Federal Conservation Division. That fence marks where private property ends and federal jurisdiction begins. My breath caught. Workers lowered their tools. Chad blinked, confusion flashing into pure gut-wrenching worry. You can't be serious. I helped survey and build that boundary with federal rangers before you were born, Grandpa replied, voice quiet but carrying iron. And you just cut through it. A chill rippled through everyone. A worker took a shaky step backward like the dirt had suddenly turned radioactive. Tampering with federal boundary markers is a felony, Grandpa added almost conversationally. Chad's face turned pale, like someone unplugged his confidence and drained his blood with it. But Grandpa wasn't done. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over a single favorite labeled contact. Federal Ranger Office, Boundary Division. He met Chad's eyes. I warned you twice. Then he pressed call, and that was the moment every smug smile in the HOA died at once. The neighborhood didn't go back to normal. Far from it. You could feel a strange kind of quiet settling, thicker than early morning fog and twice as heavy. People weren't pretending to water lawns. They were openly watching, leaning on car doors, arms folded, waiting. This was the season finale of some HOA courtroom drama, and Grandpa was the star witness who never missed. Right in the middle of it, Chad paced like a wind-up toy losing battery, mumbling into his phone, scrolling through bylaws like they were going to magically override federal boundary law. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Grandpa didn't rush. He walked to the fence line slowly, touching the old wood with reverence, like he was greeting a veteran who had stood with him through every storm, drought, and bureaucracy more dangerous than a coyote ever was. Dad, I asked quietly, you think they'll really take this seriously? Grandpa chuckled, soft but sure. Government takes boundary tampering more serious than cattle rustling back in the day. These folks just kicked a hornet's nest, and they're about to find out hornets don't care about HOA newsletters. He straightened a small, almost unnoticeable metal tag hanging from one of the posts, a silver badge, stamped faintly but unmistakably with federal coding. I suddenly felt chills. This wasn't stubborn nostalgia. This was a line in history, a literal border between private property and protected land. And they cut it like it was decorative yard trim. Look, Harold, Mr. Sutton, Chad said, voice cracking, desperate for a foothold. Why not notify us again in writing? I did, Grandpa said. 3 times, he tapped his temple. Memory is a fragile thing when pride sits on it. The HOA treasurer quietly flipped through a binder. He's right, the man whispered. 3 letters filed, noted, but dismissed for lack of modern credential verification. Chad's jaw clenched. Even if this is federal land, you can't expect us to know that from half-century-old markers. There should be updated signage. Grandpa tipped his head, almost pitying the man's ignorance. There is updated signage. Federal puts it up every decade, he pointed across the field. Sure enough, half hidden by brush but clear once noticed, stood a metal federal land post marker. Bright reflective tag, barcode, GPS lock stamp. Chad blinked so fast he could have powered a windmill. That wasn't in our maintenance logs, he whispered. Wasn't your jurisdiction to maintain? Grandpa replied. That's the entire point. I hadn't seen a grown man deflate like that outside of slow-motion comedy. His voice dropped to a strained whisper. So you're telling me we just tore down government property? I'm telling you, Grandpa said slowly. You cut through a federal boundary you had no right to touch and you stepped foot past it. The Rangers arrived. Gray paint, official insignia. Tires crunching slowly over the gravel like judgment arriving 1 inch at a time. 2 men stepped out. The older one, Ranger Doyle, spotted Grandpa and a slow, genuine smile crept across his face. Harold Sutton, he called warmly like greeting a legend. Grandpa tipped his hat. Morning, Ranger Doyle. Kids here touched something they shouldn't have. Chad staggered forward. Excuse me, this is all a misunderstanding. We were performing community maintenance per bylaws. Stop, Ranger Doyle cut in abruptly, holding up a hand. You cut a federally recorded boundary line. We weren't aware, Chad insisted. Did you assume you own all land within your HOA map? The younger ranger asked. Of course we do, Chad blurted, instantly realizing how stupid that sounded. Doyle shook his head slowly. Federal boundaries don't disappear because someone built model homes and printed a brochure. The younger ranger crouched at the cut fence, scanned the embedded tag, and the device beeped. This is registered federal boundary steel. GPS coded, tagged, reinforced in 1992. He looked up. You see these? Government survey stamp, meaning don't touch, Chad gulped. Is this criminal? The younger ranger didn't blink. Tampering with federal land markers and crossing boundary without authorization is a federal offense. Ranger Doyle looked at Chad with zero sympathy. You were warned twice. That makes this worse for you. He turned to his partner. Call it in. We'll file boundary breach and property tampering. Might need a federal assessor to reestablish stakes. Please, we can resolve this privately, Chad pleaded. Already tried private, Grandpa said. You folks like paperwork so much you ignored every warning I gave. The federal supervisor arrived. Calm. Clipped. All government efficiency. We received a boundary tampering alert. Chad, trying to regain control, gestured at Grandpa. This gentleman claims this fence is federal property, but our HOA maps don't reflect HOA maps? The supervisor repeated, slow and calm, like hearing a toddler explain rocket science. Sir, federal land boundaries are not dictated by homeowners association diagrams. Chad's composure cracked. You can't suspend an HOA's authority. The supervisor's expression didn't change. We can supersede it. The neighborhood murmured like a wave rolling through. Federal power versus paper badge. It wasn't a contest. Grandpa leaned forward in his chair, tapping his cane against the porch like a judge signaling order. That right there, he said, voice rough and satisfied, is pride choking on itself. The supervisor finished listing the necessary paperwork, incident photos, tool inventory, board member signatures, and a notice that the criminal review unit would be notified. You are temporarily prohibited from conducting further modifications, removals, or community enforcement actions until this is resolved. The supervisor turned to Grandpa. Mr. Sutton, thank you for calling this in. We'll take it from here. Grandpa nodded. Always good seeing you boys keep the land honest. Then, the final blow. Ranger Doyle. Government covers restitution for the damage to the marker. The federal government will then invoice your organization. Grandpa walked past Chad, clapped him once on the shoulder, gentle but heavy like judgment dressed as kindness. Son, next time you think you run this land, remember who it really answers to. Chad looked up, voice cracking. Who? Grandpa tapped the earth with his cane. History, law, and people who were here before your bylaws had ink. He went inside to refill his tea, leaving 2 federal trucks, an HOA meltdown, a gathering crowd, and one man who finally learned what real authority looks like. The HOA thought they controlled fences. Turns out they barely controlled their clipboards. The scene didn't end with shouting or sirens. It ended with a lesson settling into the bones of everyone present. The land wins. Grandpa wasn't defending a fence that day. He was defending history. And history had just put the HOA on notice. Chad, defeated, finally approached Grandpa. Mr. Sutton, we wish to formally apologize. Grandpa didn't smirk, didn't gloat. He set his tea aside and stood. You don't owe me the apology, he said quietly. You owe it to the land. You didn't respect what stood before you. The Rangers rolled out. Silence settled, the kind that feels earned. Grandpa walked down to the broken line, crouched a little, and ran his hand along the old wood. You held, old friend, he murmured. Why didn't you yell louder? I asked. He glanced up at me, blue eyes sharp as winter skies. When a man's sure of the land under his boots, he don't need to yell. Truth don't holler, it waits. And when folks ignore truth long enough, he looked out over the land like a king surveying his kingdom. Truth brings company. What do you call a day like this? I asked. Grandpa stretched his back, took a final slow sip. Boundary Day, he nodded. Some folks cross 'em, some folks defend 'em. Today we reminded 'em which side we stand on. And with that, he walked back to his porch, steady as ever, and began to rock gently. A simple man, holding a line older than any HOA rule could dream of. The wind picked up, rustling the grass, sliding over the old fence, carrying his final words to anyone still listening. Land remembers, and so do men worth their ground. Call to action. That was a real-life boundary drawn in the dirt and on paper. I want to know what you think. Who was the real villain here? The arrogant HOA or the developer who built on leased land and failed to disclose it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tell me, what's the pettiest thing your HOA has ever tried to control? Like and subscribe if you think history always wins.